And so welcome everyone to the ClearAdmit MBA application overview. My name is Graham Richmond. I'm the co-founder of ClearAdmit, and I'm going to moderate the session. That's probably all you really need to know about me. I'm really excited, though, to introduce our panelists who are going to shed a lot of light on the application process to their business schools. So we're going to start by introducing Nicole Faraday. She's the Associate Director of Full-Time MBA Admissions at Berkeley Haas. Hey, Nicole.
Hi, Graham. Thank you for having us.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. Next up, we have Dana Fernandez, and she is a Senior Associate Director of MBA Admissions at Harvard Business School. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Next up, we've got Virginie Fougea, who's the Global Director of Admissions for INSEAD. Welcome, Virginie.
Hey, thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you as well. We also have David Simpson, who's the Admissions Director for MBA and Masters in Finance at London Business School. Hi, David.
Hi, Graham. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
And last but not least is Jake Kohler, who is the Director of the Wellness Advanced Access Program at Wharton. Welcome, Jake.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to get rolling.
All right. So with that, let's get started. We have some general questions, kind of roundtable questions that I wanted to start with, and we're going to kick it off with Nicole from Haas. Nicole, would you be willing to walk us through what you identify as Berkeley, the Haas School Business's sort of core values? And I guess if possible, how do these values inform the way that your team approaches admissions?
Yeah, of course. So at Haas, we actually have what we call our 4 defining leadership principles at Haas, and it is really the foundation of our culture and our community at Haas. And it is question the status quo, confidence without attitude, students always, and beyond yourself. Sorry. And these 4 principles really, like I said, they create the foundation, but they also certainly inform our team on what we look for in our applicants. So obviously we look for, the academics behind our applicants, as well as the professional side of, past experience in their work, in their careers. But the piece that we really add on to specifically from Haas is that culture piece that we are looking for. And we look for those 4 principles in, subtle and not so subtle ways in the application, but that is certainly one of the things that our team looks for and values in our applicants.
Excellent. So Dana, would you be willing to answer the same thing about Harvard Business School? So yeah, what are the core values and how do they inform the way you approach admissions?
Absolutely. I'm going to talk about 3 H's today. The first one of our core values is hard work. We are preparing leaders to make a difference in the world, and the world is a complicated and challenging place. It's not easy. So the hard work comes into play in terms of there being a really strong focus of academics at Harvard Business School. We have class most weeks, 5 days a week. You're going to do 2 or 3 cases a day. Over 500 cases in your 2 years. Your job is to show up, to be invested, to share your perspective with other people. So hard work is definitely a core value. It's a big part of what we expect from our students. The second H is humility. We are preparing people to, again, be leaders who make a difference in the world. So our students need to be ready and willing to make mistakes, be willing to entertain different people's perspectives, be willing to change their course of action. And the last H is humanity. Our students are interested in making a difference that's bigger than themselves. Maybe it's for their team or their community or their country. And so that humanity piece of it, the piece of wanting to make a difference and thinking and considering about more than just yourself is definitely part of what we look at. So in terms of how this impacts the admissions process, we're keeping that into consideration. Those aren't the evaluation criteria, which I think we can talk about later. But when we look at applications, when we interview candidates, we are thinking about what it takes to be successful in our classroom. And it does come down to those 3 H's.
Excellent. Super helpful. And I think it's it's great that the H's happen to match with Harvard. That's good.
Oh yeah,
all
I
right.
guess 4 H's. There you go.
All right. So moving along, Virginie, how about you guys at INSEAD? What would you identify as kind of core values, and yeah, how do those values inform the way you approach admissions?
Sure. So INSEAD exists to bring together people, cultures, and ideas from around the world, and it's a tagline that you see on the walls. So we were founded post Second World War with this idea that bringing peace in Europe could happen through dialogue, business, and prosperity. And there was a need to make Europe in a post-war period of reconciliation and renaissance. And so I believe INSEAD values still stands today, and they are key, even more important than a few years ago, as we observe more and more polarization. So when we keep that in the back of our mind, and when we select people, we select people who are willing to exchange ideas, to exchange opinions. And we say that it's okay to challenge everyone's opinion in the classroom, and learn from this. So people who are willing to share, and people who are also willing to learn from one another. I'm convinced that we don't make people anything, but we enable people to become. And to enable us to enable people to become, we need to know who those people are, and how they and their values as well, and how they want to contribute in this world. So this is where it's really very much linked to our core mission and values.
In terms of how you're looking at the application, like, are there specific ways that you look at the application to see, to sort of identify those traits in someone?
Yeah, in the essays, in the videos, in the interviews, we really want to understand the core values of those people and how they match our core values. Yes.
Got it. Okay. So David, let's turn to you from London Business School. What are some of the values at LBS, and yeah, how do they impact the way you read files and assess candidates?
So London Business School, our aim is to have an impact on the way the world does business and the way that business impacts the world. So it's got a long-term view of developing people to bring out their best, and I guess a drive for long-term good and sustainable futures for all. But what it really boils down to, people who have a global outlook, who care about what's happening in the world and recognize the knock-ons of what they do throughout the world in terms of supply chains and societies and people. So we're looking for individuals through the admissions process who are interested in people and the world. And it sounds like a big, obvious statement, but really it's a thing about focus. It's a thing about what kind of state of mind you're in when you're learning. Are you open to ideas from people, from fellow students, as well as from the professors at the front of the room and from the books? So it's a very open, international, safe learning environment where we're bringing together ideas, and people can express views, and people are, I think, sometimes shocked with what they're learning, because they'll often be the best where they're from. But the reality is, you only get stronger and better from incorporating ideas and experiences from other people who are the best from wherever they're from.
That's a great point. I just was like immediately flashed back to my very first moment stepping on campus when I did my MBA, and that feeling of like, there's like a group of people in this room who are like way better than me, know a lot more, and from all over the world, et cetera. So great point. It's which also harkens to a little bit of what Dana was talking about, humility, right? So being able to listen to others. Jake, you've been patient. How about Wharton? What are the kind of core values, and how did those values inform the reading process?
Yeah, appreciate it. And it's great hearing how each of the other schools represents, differing, but, in some ways similar missions. When you posed this question, I was thinking a lot about Dean James, who's been our dean for about 3 years now. And the question that she's been asking each year when she speaks to staff and faculty has been around like, how can Wharton leverage its historic strengths as a research powerhouse and as a training ground for leadership, but to do so in ways that are more equitable, can reach more people and advance the world even more. And what Wharton has done, and what is kind of like fundamental in our principles, are the data-informed approach that we have, trying to have scalable solutions and equitable outcomes across the board and around the world, and doing so through elevated research and the impact of that research in particular, innovative pedagogy across multiple modalities, and then how can we collaborate thoughtfully across disciplines and divides around any part of the industry and or the world. And I think those things, while that language I think is new as of a couple years ago, those specific things as Dean James articulates them, I think fundamentally they reflect a lot of what our admissions team has aimed to do, and the values for the past decade plus in our admissions office have been around reading to admit every candidate. Our approach is structured so that way every single candidate has a fair and equal shot at gaining admission and learning about who they are and what they're going to bring to the table, and trying to use data-informed approaches to help guide us. The ideas of that you read in a book of how to reduce signal and noise, and like trying to orchestrate processes to reduce bias on our part. So that is, I think, our aim, and hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I guess it makes your job a lot more fun when you're kind of reading to admit as opposed to reading to deny, right? It's like it's a simple concept, right? But it's just funny how that works. So I think what we're going to do now is get a little bit into some of the basics, right? Because our audience today are, generally folks who are thinking of applying to business school, probably most of them in the coming cycle. So starting in the fall, and looking to enter business school the following fall, although it depends. I know INSEAD, you guys have the January start as well. But in any event, so because of that, I thought it'd be good to just have a little bit of an overview here. And I know that you all vary, but these are some of the general components that leading business schools in the world ask for. There'll be a form, there might be a fee. Some schools have a waiver for the fee. You'll have to provide college transcripts, and you might have to take a test. There are multiple tests available in many instances. You have to submit a resume. Most of these programs will have essays that you write, or short answers, and then letters of recommendation, interviews. There are sometimes even video components, which maybe David or Virginie might talk about. I know some of the programs use video as well. And then in case of non-native English speakers, in some cases, there's going to be a language exam. So these are kind of the general components. But what I thought would be interesting would be to give each of you the floor to talk a little bit about your own process. And what we've done, I just want to caveat this, is we've got a slide here for each school. So we're going to start again with Nicole at Haas. And on the slide, what we did is we just included what you've required in this past cycle, knowing that, we haven't really quite flipped the calendar yet to the next admission season. And so I just want everyone tuning in today to be aware that things can always change. But Nicole, we have a slide here with the basics for Haas. And so I just thought it'd be interesting for you to kind of walk us through, is there anything that people should know about your process? Maybe something that's a little different, or just something you wanted to highlight. So I think, here we've got a slide coming up with your kind of requirements. So we'll start there.
Great. Thanks, Graham. So I would imagine that many of our schools will have a very similar process. This for Berkeley Haas, I wouldn't say we have anything exceptional. We are, as Graham noted, that some of the schools might be making some changes. This is kind of the time that we take the opportunity to make some changes or improvements to our application process. So we are currently in the middle of that. And I can say that there are going to be some changes coming up in the next cycle. Most specifically to our letter of recommendation, we still will have 2 letters of recommendation required, but we are moving to the common letter of recommendation, so that it is a little bit easier on our applicants to get letters from their recommenders, and that would be a change from us, that we had a very specific letter for Haas, but we are moving now to a common letter. There is a little bit of a difference in our interview process. I know every school does it a little bit differently, but we do have an interview by invitation only. So once our applicants submit their application, it goes through an initial review from our team, and then we invite those applicants that we feel are the strongest to apply for an interview. And we are still doing interviews via remote, like live remote via Zoom, with our alumni or our current students, and offer a video component interview as well. So it's an option to interview over video, where the system asks a question, and you have a response time to where you're recorded, and then that video recording is then assessed by our team at a later time. So I would say the biggest thing that's unique to our application is probably our essay questions right now. And I can say that one of our essays is staying the same. It is what makes you feel alive and why. And we in particular, those of us that read applications really love this question and love the responses that we get. There are so many unique essay responses that we get with this question that we really didn't want to lose that question at this time. So those of you that had seen that question before, that is staying. We are going to be changing our second essay question and some of our short answer questions, but that is TBD right now. So stay tuned.
Excellent. All right. I appreciate you breaking all this news for us.
Yeah.
I will say, I did see someone was asking, like, what's the common letter of recommendation? And basically there are a number of schools that I think with the help of GMAC had kind of agreed to a set of recommendation questions. So it sounds like you're coming on board with that. I was very happy to hear that you're keeping the what makes you feel alive question, just because it's such a fun question. And I think it gives candidates a chance to talk about something that maybe would not come up in the file, like the fact that I feel like it was Eric, the director of admissions, who said on a session we had, he talked about someone maybe writing about how every morning they wake up at 5 and get out on their kayak on the lake that they live nearby or something, so things that maybe are not going to be on the resume or just are different.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I've had everything from rock climbing to making tea.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So everyone stay tuned, because it sounds like there will be some changes, but if you are really anxious to get started with your Haas application, or at least thinking about it, it sounds like you could begin noodling on this what makes you feel alive and why question. So, all right. I appreciate you going through that, Nicole. Dana, would you be willing to do the same? I think we have a little slide for you as well. And again, I apologize that I recognize that, we're really early in the cycle. And I don't know how we've managed to edit the slides on the fly, but it looks like some of the edits stuck between one side and the other. So we'll erase that and let you have the floor.
Great. Thanks, Graham. I think before I get into the nitty gritty of the HBS application, I just want to explain what we're looking for. We're going to take a holistic approach to the application, which many schools do. And what that means is we're looking at everything that you submit. And at Harvard Business School, when we're looking at all of these components, we're thinking about your habit or your track record of leadership. Where have you demonstrated leadership in the past, just to get an idea of what your leadership potential is. This doesn't mean you've had to have been the president of the largest student organization. It doesn't have to be anything formal. There's lots of different ways and experiences that you may have demonstrated leadership in. We're also looking for analytical ability and appetite. It's a rigorous graduate program. We want to make sure you can succeed academically, but the appetite's really important too. We want people who are excited and eager to learn about business. You're going to be at HBS for 2 years. You're going to work on 500 cases. We want people who will be just as excited to work on the 300th case as they are on that first case. And then we're going to look at engaged community citizenship. So what communities have you been a part of in the past, and how have you been engaged in those communities? In terms of our application components, a few things I'll highlight. Let's see, I guess I can go in order here. The essay, we have one required essay. We basically say, we have your transcripts, we have your resume, your test scores, your recs. What else do we need to know about you? So it's a pretty open-ended question, which I know can be very challenging for people. There's no one right answer. There's no one right approach. We are not looking for the best writer. We are simply looking to get to know you better and learn something new about you. I'll also highlight the interviews. Ours are by invitation only. You will be meeting with or interviewing with a member of our admissions team. You'll either do that in person on campus, or we travel to certain locations throughout the globe, or you'll meet with an admissions board member via Zoom. But it'll be face-to-face, either in person or virtually, with a member of our admissions team. That is by invitation only. Our application fee, we do have a need-based fee waiver. We don't want the application fee to present any type of hurdle for those interested in applying. So if this may be the case for you, you would go in, start an application, and then apply for the fee waiver. I do want to mention two things that aren't on the slide. One is we have a third step of our process. We have the written application. The interview is the second step. And our third step is our post-interview reflection. This is a short writing exercise that happens after your interview. I think your reflection is due within 24 hours. It has a lot of purposes. One, it's about reflection, which is an important part of our program, but it's also meant for us to get a better sense of, what is your writing ability on a day-to-day basis. This is not something you spend months working on like your essay. This is something you kind of do in the moment, maybe something similar to an email you would send a colleague after a meeting. And it's also your opportunity to have the last word, to tell us, if there's anything that we didn't cover in your interview or anything else you'd like to add. And then the one other thing I want to sneak in, which has to do with admissions, is financial aid. Our financial aid at Harvard Business School is need-based. I think many of our peer schools do merit-based aid. So need-based, again, we don't want studying at the school. We don't want anyone to not be able to study at the school because they don't have the funding to do so. So we have a need-based financial aid approach. It happens after you're admitted. Happy to talk more about it in the breakout rooms, but over half of our students do receive need-based aid. That ranges from a few $1,000s a year all the way up to full tuition. The average is about $42,000 per year that a student would get in need-based aid. So I think I covered all the things I wish to highlight here, the things that may be different when compared to some of our peer schools.
Yeah, appreciate it, Dana, especially adding that third step of your process, which, I think is important for people to kind of have on their radar, and then the need-based financial aid, which is different. So appreciate that. I do remember a conversation I had with Dee Leopold, who used to work in admissions at HBS, where she said, people were kind of wondering about this exercise where we have to write something after the interview and get it in pretty quickly, like 24 hours. And she said the exact same thing, which was, hey, if you go to a meeting and you need to get the client a summary of what was discussed or some kind of deliverable, you do it within a day. Like it's something that you do right away. And so it's a really good exercise for that. So I think it's a fun thing. I mean, maybe the applicants are more nervous about it, but I think it's a great exercise that you all have in the process. So thanks for highlighting that, because we didn't have it here. Let's move on. Virginie, you guys have a number of aspects to your process that are a little bit different. So maybe you can pick a couple of them and highlight. I mean, I'm thinking of, the interview, the fact that you do a couple of interviews, or different things that you do. So
yeah, sure. Sure. So let's start with the video interviews then. So we do ask for the video interviews pre-selection. So it has to be completed together with the rest of the applications. The reason for this is because we recruit from all over the world, and not everyone is an English native speaker like myself, and sometimes we need to have some elements of reassurances in English, not just through a standardized test, another standardized test, like the TOEFL, for example, or the PT. So we understand that sometimes people are not very much at ease with taking a standardized test and would be more comfortable doing a video interviews. And where it's perfectly fine to make a grammatical mistake, but we do understand where we want to see how people convey their ideas, even if it's grammatically clumsy, I should say. So this is the reason for having the video. We love it. People do it very, very well. It's a great way of seeing people in action rather than just reading something that is a little bit formal or stiff with an application, with an essay. We have the essays that has not changed for years because we think we get good answers from it. People get really genuine about it. And this is where we really get to know people, to start to know people, where they describe themselves. It's not about work. It's not about achievements or successes. It's really what shaped you in life and what makes you the person you are today. So this is a very interesting essay that we love. Maybe the other thing that I should mention on this slide is the elephant in the room, which is the GMAT or the GRE, which again, considering that we have people from all over the globe, not everyone is used to the way a GMAT or GRE assesses analytical skills or math, and when you're in undergrad you learn math in a different way depending on the region where you apply from. So we are very, very cautious of that, with that, and very mindful of what a top score means in different countries, in different regions of the world, and not everyone is equal to this. So we benchmark not against the entire applicant pool, but we can also benchmark the GMAT score based in the region, and 640 or 610 can be an amazing score in some countries, in some region, not because the person is not as intelligent as another who would score 710. It's just that it's not the same type of prep and not the same type of learning. So we are happy to have all sort of GMAT, as long as it enables us to understand the academic capacity. The program is a one-year format, so we really expect people to hit the ground running. It's academically rigorous, and we really want people to benefit from everything. And this is the reason for having the GMAT or the GRE, which we value in the same way, together with the college transcript, is really to understand the academic capacity for a rigorous, intense program. And then we move on to the rest of the elements. And the video interviews come together with the essays. And maybe the last thing that is not mentioned here is about the interviews. I don't know how you want to deal with the interviews that are happening in person or via Zoom with alumni. So we do not conduct interviews. It's not done by the administration of the school. It's really alumni. Because as prospective applicants, you're very likely to have questions for our alumni to understand what was the program like, what it brought to them, what did they do 2 years after the program, 5 years down the road, or 10 years down the road. So we have some very prominent alumni who do interviews for us. And it's also a chance for people who are a foreigner in a country to be able to meet another foreigner and a local person, to be able to express cultural sensitivity or to assess cultural sensitivity through the alumni community. So this is the idea for having alumni conducting the interviews rather than us. And that comes after the pre-selection upon invitation as well.
And are you still doing 2 of them for each candidate?
We are, yes.
Yeah,
we
so
are.
that's another thing is that that's a little bit unique in that you get 2 interviews, both with
Yeah.
alums, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for the reason that it's very important sometimes you can have a bad day, and it's important to, as Jake said earlier, we want to give a chance. We want to find ways to admit, and sometimes you can have a bad day, and having a second interview with someone else, and you can relate, you can get along and better. So we like to give two interviews.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that. Very helpful. David, let's hear a little bit about London Business School and the components that you all have. And I guess, I don't know if you know yet if there can be any changes for the coming year, but walk us through your stuff here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Graham. I think ours is a fairly straightforward process. The important thing is that everything we ask for, we use. We don't want you going through the hard work and at times pain of completing tests or providing references unless they're really important to us. So there's the online application where we ask a lot of questions. So you'll see that we have actually just one required essay, but we ask lots of smaller sub-questions during the application. Most of the application is built around you, your career so far, and your longer term aims from your career, and how London Business School is going to be part of that story. So I'm always really interested, first of all, to look at the resume, to look at the CV, to see what you've done and how you talk about it as well, actually. And then from there, we'll go into the application and learn a bit more about you personally, what makes you tick and what you like to do. The essay is quite business-like. It really is about your aims for your next job in your career. We'll ask questions elsewhere about where you think that might be geographically as well. We glue all the parts together to build up a picture of you before and you after, and where we might fit in. Your transcripts and your standardized test scores are important so we can figure out if you'll be okay with the academic content, especially the quant stuff. So the test is important for that. It's a great leveler. It's a great way to shine, but also just to prove that, hey, I'll be all right with this. I'll be fine. I can get through juggling all the different courses in one go in that busy first year of the program. The language exams are backed up massively by the fact that we have an interview in person or virtually with alumni anywhere in the world. So like INSEAD, we use alumni to help us interview, to give that perspective of somebody within the community who knows what it takes. They also have the local knowledge, local business knowledge or sector knowledge, where you're coming from. And so they have an extra depth of information to refer to. We'll do some interviews as well. So I do some, but very few. The vast majority are alumni led. We might fill in the gaps afterwards. We have an optional essay where you can tell us anything else you think we should know. And this is, well, it's as important as you make it. So sometimes people don't complete that. Sometimes people do. You know, it's up to you whether you think you want to take the opportunity or what might be missing. On the whole, though, there's great opportunity to tell us what we need to know in the app. So it is a bit of a free shot, a free chance to tell us something else that's relevant. So if anything, we've trimmed down over the years to get to this point because we know how much work you put in, but so much info comes from the interview and the follow-up video interview. So like INSEAD, we have that video interview. We do that after you've got to the interview stage, so not with the first application, but a little bit later on. So as you're preparing for your interview, you'll have to submit a video question or two to us, and that gives us an extra perspective. It helps us in the office because we don't get to meet or talk to every single person, and this is our way that we've had eyes on everybody coming through. So it gives us that consistency as well as the dynamic view that the alumni are giving us.
Excellent. So, and it sounds like no big changes are planned for the coming cycle, or maybe you guys haven't had a chance to to reflect on it yet.
we're still right in the thick of the current year, but I don't foresee great changes at all. Actually, we really like what we've got, finessed it over the years. We will tend to perhaps update our interview guidance, so alumni are getting into deeper areas or broader areas, whatever they might be. But on the whole, the solid specifics we require at the application point give us what we need.
Okay, got it. All right, let's move on and talk to Jake over at Wharton. Jake, we've got again a slide with the basic components, and would just love your insights into what maybe kind of stands out or is something you want to call our attention to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that translates from what all my colleagues have been sharing. I think we seek and we look for similar pieces, things that I know will have some evolution, though I can't describe them quite yet. I think, but I expect we'll have 2 essays again. I think there may be some evolution to our prompts in the coming year, but to be determined. We'll make sure that's communicated as soon as that's finalized, and that's before the application deadline opens. And I do anticipate that we will have an expansion of the language exams that we accept in the coming year, though again, the specifics of that will come in the near term. We've had for several years now too, while we ask for a language test from non-native English speakers, we have also given a waiver for anybody who has completed any educational program where English was the primary language of instruction, and that will remain the case too. So there is some waiver opportunity even within that. Where I think Wharton is unique in its process is in the interview, because they are not one-on-one interviews as each of the other schools offered. What we host is that team-based discussion, which is also invite only. But the reason why we do it is because of how important teamwork is part of the Wharton experience. And I know teamwork is important at all these business schools. We've each highlighted that already. I'm sure we'll again. But we really wanted to capture that in a way that we can't do so just by reading the application. So the team-based discussion, another term for it, which I tend to use in our application advice sessions, is a leader list group exercise. We are not trying to determine who the best leader among 6 candidates are. What we're trying to learn is how each of you are able to contribute to the collective orientation as you move from having 6 unique ideas to a final team recommendation, which you do over the course of a 30 to 40 minute period. And it's a way that our team has found some excitement on learning something different that we could never capture through our application previously. As Graham, you had noted this earlier, like it's a lot easier for me to say, or for us to say, like this part's really fun, or this part's great in the admissions process. But in my 4+ years at Wharton, every single individual with whom I've spoken with after their team-based discussion in our interview process have said how much they enjoyed the process. It allows for you to just be you and utilize the years of collaborative efforts you had in college and in your professional career and highlight those just naturally by doing nothing besides you, and your prep is only just having some of your own ideas about the prompt that we'd give you a number of days in advance. So we would give plenty more information about that part and all of our application materials. Last year, we produced a digital PDF that basically walked through every part of our application and our guidance on how to approach and what it is our team is looking for that. We will do so again. So I won't go into all the details of everything else because we'll make sure that's available to everybody in the future.
Okay, that sounds good. And one thing, in case people are wondering, I do know that at the end of the team-based discussion, people taking part in it do get a little individual one-on-one to just talk a little bit about their background, I think, and how they felt the team-based discussion went. So it's not so I know some people worry, oh, I won't get any kind of me time with just an interviewer. So that is part of it too, I think, right?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. That's a great addition.
Okay. So let's move on. We have some kind of questions that actually have come to us from people who attend these events. And so the first one we're going to give to Nicole, and that is about the GMAT and GRE. And funny enough, like I've seen, people have been posting in the Q&A or the chat some of these questions they have, and this is one that's come up. And so the GMAT and the GRE are qualitatively different tests. What would you say to an applicant who's deciding which one to take, and how does your team sort of evaluate the scores? So Nicole, your thoughts on this one?
Yes, I get the fun question. So the standardized test score, I think, some of my colleagues have already touched on this, but we use that as an evaluation tool to help us determine academic readiness for our programs, just to see if our applicants are able to succeed academically and handle the rigor of an MBA curriculum. Especially from the quantitative side. So for Haas, the standardized test score, both the GMAT and the GRE, we accept them both. It's one component that we use to determine the academic readiness along with your undergraduate transcripts. So we're going to be looking at your coursework and your grades that you got in those courses as well. So we kind of look at that as a combined academics section of your application. So it really is, one piece of the holistic evaluation that we all do with your applications, but it is a required piece. For Haas, we don't really distinguish the GMAT or the GRE, so we accept them both. Like I said, we don't have a preference on either of them. I typically tell students like they are different tests, and some people do better on one than the other. And so if you're not happy with one of the tests that you take, and you feel that is not representing you or your academic side, then you might want to try and take the other test and see if that is a better test for you to take. And, like I said, we accept them both. So, we would look at the higher test score. And so it's something that you sometimes have to play around with a little bit if you're kind of struggling with one of the tests, or if you don't feel like it's representing you well. So yeah, I think it is, again, it's only one piece that we look at, but it is something that has kind of proven to show that that our applicants do, succeed, at least in that one piece, that shows that they do succeed academically in the program.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, two things that were said earlier. I think one was Virginie was talking about how the admissions team knows to look at scores, not just, in the abstract, but also in the context of where the candidate is coming from. And I think that's probably true for all of you. I'll go out on a limb and suggest that's the case.
Right. Yeah. We do pool our applications regionally, especially, globally from around the world. So we will look at, test scores a little bit differently from region to region.
Right. Okay. That's great. And then the other thing I would just mention to folks is that even though these are standardized tests and they're designed to sort of measure your aptitude, I find that people get better at them if they take them more than once. And so that happens a lot. I find that people take the same test twice and they get a different result. So fear not, if you don't do well the first time, you might even want to budget time to take these tests more than once, just knowing when you think about your application calendar, that might be something you have to do. Dana, I think we have a question for you now that is about work experience. And, we always hear that work experience is kind of a key aspect of the MBA, applicant sort of background. And so I just wondered, at HBS, when you're reading files, how are you evaluating someone's professional history?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the first thing to point out is that we are looking at all different application components in order to get a sense of your professional history. So it's not just the resume that you're submitting. Many schools also have additional work history or questions they ask about your work experience. We're of course looking at your recommendations, getting that third-party perspective on the work that you've been doing. You might talk about it in your essay. So all this to say is we are learning about your professional experience throughout your application. I think the most important thing here is that we need to understand what you do. So don't take it for granted that we know what your job is. We are very familiar with all different industries, all different companies, but a business school resume or application is different than applying to a job because we probably don't share your technical or your industry background. So I think an important thing for you as applicants and candidates to the program is first to make sure that you're clear in helping us understand what you do on a day-to-day basis. And diving like a little deeper than that, once we kind of get past the fundamentals of what do you do, we want to see how you've challenged yourself, what decisions you've made in your career, what you've done with the opportunities that you've had. Of course, we look at it within the context of the industry that you work in, with the company that you work at, but we want to see how you've challenged yourself. We're looking for growth. We're looking at your trajectory. So we're looking at kind of all of those things, but I do think an important note is to make sure that you're helping people who probably don't come from your industry or your company understand the important work that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think, it's something that we talk about a lot at ClearAdmit about, when we talk about candidates and record our podcast each week, we talk a lot about people are so into their work and into the domain that they're involved in that often they have trouble explaining it to someone who's not. And so we always talk about how you should just imagine that your, 8th grade English professor is the one reading your application and that they don't necessarily know anything about, private equity or, consulting or biotech or whatever field you're in, and that you need to explain it in a way that a very smart person without industry expertise would understand. So I think that's perfect advice that you gave. All right. So our next question, as far as these insights are concerned, is for Virginie. And this is an interesting one that we got because it's about recommendation letters and it's well worded, so it's sort of this like, what makes for an effective letter, not just a good one, but a great one? What sort of stands out when you're reading these?
The most effective recommendations are usually coming from recommenders who know you well. And when I say know you well, is people you are in touch with on a regular basis, and maybe people who have been following you along a few months or a couple of years and can comment on you as a leader, and also can comment on the evolution that they can have observed. Believe me, but unfortunately we see recommendations where it's written, I cannot comment on this question, or I cannot comment on these skills, and this is really a missed opportunity. And usually what I recommend people to do is, it doesn't hurt to call your recommender and say, this is what I'm trying to do. I want to do an MBA, and I want to do an MBA at this school or at this school, because we are all different, as you could see from the conversations for an hour now. So explain why this school and not another one, or why an MBA at this point in your career, and give them a couple of ideas of why, and that will be helping them write a very insightful letter for us, be on your achievements, but also be on maybe on your weakness and how you're trying to tackle those. So really see it's important that you keep in touch with your recommender and explain. Because we take this holistic approach to the selection process, it's always helpful to have examples that relate to what we have read somewhere else, and we understand the journey you have had, and where you project yourself. So this is also one thing you want to help your recommender explain in the letters. We see letters coming from a professional background, because most of the letters for INSEAD relate to work environment. but we've seen very personal, it can be very insightful. We had a father writing a letter of recommendation, and that was perfectly fine because he was working with his daughter, and the letter was extremely insightful and very objective. So that's perfectly fine if you're working for a family business and somebody from your family is writing the letter of recommendation. It can be an educational one, but it's a little bit more challenging for the recommender, as it is likely that you haven't been in touch with them for a number of years. And the great letter I saw once was somebody who was requested a letter from his banker because he was an entrepreneur and went to his banker who had made all the finances with him, and they had worked on the business plan together. And that was a great letter of recommendation and a surprise as well.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I think, one of the points that you made that I really want to underline is this idea that when you fill out the application form and put in the name of your recommender and their email address so that they can then get an email from the school to fill out the form, your work is not done. Like, I think you make a really good point that you want to actually talk to your recommenders and make sure that they understand like why you're doing this. So that's terrific advice. I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
And give them time, because
Yes.
because if you just send them the link on 2 days before the application deadline, it's not fair on them. So that's,
yeah, and I would add one last thing, which is assume that they will be late. So I often tell people just tell them the deadline's like a week earlier than it actually is, because sometimes they don't get it in on time. I know we're kind of, speaking of time, we're kind of running a little behind schedule, so I'm going to try to keep things rolling along here. David, we have a question for you. So one of the aim of admissions teams is to assess mutual fit between an applicant and their program. How do you do that? Like, what does fit look like for you at LBS and, in the application process?
Okay, I'll try and be punchy. So what does fit mean? I mean, it's a broad word, we all use it, and I think it's this dark vortex, and what exactly are they looking for? How do I change what I say about myself to fit the school? That's not the point. It's put across the most honest and transparent version of you with plenty of personality, you in your natural state. How do we? It's about identity, and that identity of a school is made by people. So the differences between us are evidently not necessarily the application forms or even the sort of standards we're looking for. It's just the subtleties of the identity of the class and something about the place, more than just a feeling. So I would say we use the interview more than anything to assess. So in the first draft of the application, we use everything we've got on you to think, yep, that's someone we'd really like to see to learn more. We don't cut a huge amount to get to the interview, and the interview will be personal. It will be two people having a conversation, and the other person, the interviewer, will be trained to recognize that their classmates were all quite different. So this person they're interviewing doesn't have to look and act like they are, and they were, and they do. They just have to fit into this overall group. We're all recruiting classes of students here. We know there's a range of types, there's a range of personalities, but there's something common to each school with the way that makes people tick. For London Business School, I think is that desire to understand the world and to learn from others and to build that network of people you have enjoyed learning from, I think. So we're looking for something that looking for you to be able to give and absorb as well, and be successful, hopefully, in whatever you choose to do. So all I'd say is the most important, get talking to people. If you can't visit, talk to as many people as possible from within the community. Don't rely on secondhand information. So other people's preconceptions or organizations' views on it. Speak to people yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think it's fair, you talk about fit and all the schools use that term, but what does it really mean? And, and I think it's helpful for you to define it here. So, all right. So last but not least, Jake, we have a question for you to take the lead on. And this is about kind of what I would call almost like, either transcript repair or preparation for business school. So, let's say someone has a lower GPA and they want to do some academic work to maybe help demonstrate academic ability, or let's just say that they haven't had a lot of exposure to quantitative coursework or coursework that they, expect to see in an MBA program. Is there anything that you typically would recommend that someone do if they're in either of those camps?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that we get a lot, every single year. I think fundamentally, for all of you as prospective candidates, you're here and you're doing a ton already. Like, absent of all the things in the application process, you're already doing so much. Some of you are probably working 80, 90, maybe even 100 hours, like outrageous amounts of time. And I want you to allow yourself to be human and not put this added pressure that everything in an application process needs to be at the nth degree or the absolute exceptional mark. I do think that there are a couple camps that might benefit from something like this. And we've talked about holistic admissions a lot. If across all the materials and all the pieces of information that we have, you think that there is a glaring hole or weakness that exists. So in the case of maybe you perform worse in maybe humanities-based classes or like writing-oriented classes, or you had very few of those, and in your test sections you had very little, maybe your softest scores by far would be in the writing or the verbal components. There might be, whether it's a boot camp or a course, or you might just try to find some external mechanism to highlight an ability that you think is otherwise underrepresented or softer represented. The same could be said for maybe a quantitative or analytical oriented space. What I will offer, though, I think there's a group of people who maybe they've done perfectly well across their career, their academic background, and they just don't have foundational business classes at this juncture because they selected a different curricular journey. And I don't think that it is a requisite to have to start taking those types of classes in order to show that you can do business coursework in the future, because we see that there's really strong predictive value across many backgrounds. And it's, again, your professional experience we can use to help guide us towards your future business self or your future self across the board. So I do think that some of these can be very useful. I know that even some of my peers here, like the institutions that they represent, offer some really great versions of these. And I think it's contextual. I think my recommendation is only pursue this if you think it's filling something that's otherwise a glaring hole, weakness, or softness in your application. And besides that, be really confident in the totality of everything else.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful to put that into context here. So we've run a little bit long, and I know that the folks attending are dying to get into these individual breakouts with you all so they can ask their kind of school specific questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to let our panelists run off and set themselves up in their Zooms. And if everyone who's joining us can just sit tight in terms of the applicants who are here, we'll get you the link so you can join our panels. But I did want to thank Dana, Nicole, Jake, Virginie, and David for taking part. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you about all these things. And I feel like I always learn quite a bit when we do these. So appreciate all the insights that you've shared. We'll let you guys duck off now and get set up. And in the meantime, so thanks so much for joining today. In the meantime, sit tight, everyone, because we're going to get you the links to the sessions, these individual Zooms. I do want to give the panelists just a minute to get set up so that they're not bombarded with your questions straight out of the gate. So while we're kind of waiting, I wanted to give you just a little bit of advice, since I know that you're all potentially embarking on the application process. And so just a few very basic tips. Aim for high scores. If you're taking the GMAT or the GRE or whatever exams you need to take, if it's a TOEFL for English language, try to do as well as you can. I mean, this is that sort of put your best foot forward. I mean, the schools on this panel and all the schools really that we host in these events over the coming weeks here, they're competitive. And so you want to put your best foot forward. So aim for high scores. And as I said earlier in the session, consider the fact that you might have to take a test twice. The second point I wanted to make is that generally speaking, you should apply in the round when you think your application is going to be strongest. Most of these schools have multiple admissions rounds. Usually there's a round in October, another round in January, and a final round in most cases in March. INSEAD's a bit of an exception in that they have different rounds because they have different start dates. But in any event, the point I'm trying to make is just that you really want to apply when your application's at its peak. There are some exceptions. I mean, if you are in an overrepresented portion of the applicant pool where there are lots of candidates who have the same kind of background as you, your advantage would be to apply earlier, right? But again, don't ever apply until you're ready. Make sure your essays and all those materials are in good shape. As David said, engage the community as you research programs. Don't just let that colleague at work tell you what they think of a program. Talk to as many people as you can who are either current students or graduates of the programs. It'll just help to inform your application process. It'll make your essay stronger, your interview process easier, all of it. So definitely do that. And then this last one really is, frankly, related to the prior one, and that is demonstrate your interest in the programs that you're applying to. And the way that you can do that, obviously, is by conducting that research so that when you're interviewed and you're asked about why you want to be there, you can give an informed response and kind of dazzle your interviewer with your knowledge of the program that shows that you've really done your homework and thought about how you're going to fit in. So just some basic tips to give you some food for thought, as you begin working on applications. We're going to post the chat, the Zoom links into the chat here so that you have them. I would recommend that you copy and paste them so that you can bounce from one school to another if you want to go into multiple rooms, since you can only go to one at a time. The other thing that I would recommend is if you lose them, you should also, by being an attendee today, have an email in your inbox with these links as well. So you can bounce off. The schools will stick around for about a half an hour and you can pepper them with questions. I know they're anxious and excited to talk with you and get those questions. So thank you so much for taking part in the main session today. We have sessions all this month. Every Wednesday, we're going to have Columbia, Dartmouth, Yale. It's a long list of schools that we're going to be meeting with over the coming weeks. It's every Wednesday this month at noon Eastern. So thank you so much on behalf of the whole ClearAdmit team. Real pleasure to host this and to have you all here, and enjoy your time with the schools as you chat with them.